Deion Sanders has made so many headlines in his short time in Colorado. We're going to talk about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Buffs.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? This is Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba, and joining me today, special guest Spencer McLaughlin. We've been dodging each other for like a week now, but we're finally here. We've been dipping and dodging.
That's been a one-sided dodge.
It's okay. You know, we've been dipping and dodging. But today we're doing the biggest headlines surrounding Coach Prime in Colorado. We're going to talk about the biggest challenges that they face this season or just in the future in general, and then we're going to talk about their ceiling as a program. Again this season and in the future. But before we do, I want you guys to know this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Okay, Spencer. And Spencer's the host of Locked On Pac-12, by the way, and that's what makes him qualified. As you see by his Pac-12 propaganda back there, we love
Pac-12 stand, baby. Pac-12 stand right here.
We love to see it. Okay, so biggest headlines draft. There's going to be 4 picks. I'll probably start us off just to get us rolling. It could be about anything that has or you think will happen. And so I think obviously the number 1 pick has to be when Coach Prime is hired by Colorado. He was linked to USF, which South Florida is where he is originated from. He played at Florida State, played for the Atlanta Falcons, which is obviously Georgia's close to Florida, and he's a big Southern guy. And so USF was linked to him. Cincinnati was linked to him, not really in the South, but a couple other programs that people thought would be better fits for him. And then he picked Colorado, a program that went 1-11, hasn't had a winning season. I think they've had 1 winning season in this past decade. It's been tough sledding. Colorado's usually been bottom of the barrel in terms of college football. And so for them to get who I think is probably the most polarizing coach in college football was a pretty big deal. Spencer, what do you think, and what is your next pick?
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue with that as being the number 1 headline, just Coach Prime being there. Just the fact that he chose Colorado and that he's put the Buffs on the map. The spring game's going to be on ESPN. It's already sold out. He's got all the flash and substance, and he plays well on social media, at least from a content standpoint. And that is, make no mistake about it, like the football results do need to follow. But that is part of the reason Colorado hired Coach Prime, is he puts you on the map. Even if you're not very good, he makes you interesting, because Colorado, the last several years fell into, I saw this great piece a while back from someone who writes about the California Golden Bears. He was writing about their football team, and he said Cal has fallen into, the death trap of being bad and boring. And you don't want to be bad and boring, because that makes it harder to get out of the bad phase if you're boring. But Coach Prime inherently makes you interesting, because people will want to see him succeed or will want to see him fail. And you and I both know, being people who talk about him on a pretty regular basis, I've been all, realignment the last couple months and whatnot, but he is someone who will fire people up one way or another, like the song by Blondie, like one way or another, man. Like, people are going to want to see what he can do. There are people who think he is the worst person on planet Earth and that he should never be a coach and he's awful and I hope he stinks. And there are people who, if you say he might not get to 500 this year, which he probably won't, you are just a hater and Coach Prime is going to make it and he's going to go 9-3 this year in year 1 and all this sort of stuff. So that alone, right? That sort of chatter, that volume of conversation surrounding your football team is good for the school and it's good for the team as well, because it gets you on people's radars. And
right.
I think number 2, in terms of what the biggest headlines he's generated have been the players that he's brought in so far, and the players he's been able to get from the high school ranks. We saw him flip a wide receiver who I think was looking at Auburn or Notre Dame, and we saw him bring in Jackson Hunter, of course his son Shador, who's probably going to be the quarterback in there. That's a caliber of players that you just hadn't seen at Colorado in a long, long time, and that shifts the equation. And I had a friend of mine who's a Stanford grad and a big Pac-12 sports fan, He texted me one day and said, is Coach Prime just going to win because he's just going to bring in too much talent to do anything else? Like, he might not win 11, 12 games, but is he just going to win 7, 8 games if he just keeps bringing in top 20 recruiting classes? And history would tell you the answer to that question is yes. If he's going to recruit at Colorado at a top 20 level year in and year out, it's going to be pretty hard, barring catastrophic coaching decisions in games and just an utter lack of preparedness, which, given his track record, at least at Jackson State, doesn't seem like that's going to be what happens here. He will eventually start to win games, but there is an adjustment here, right? Everyone, it's an instant gratification society, and the transfer portal makes it easier to turn things around. Very true. But the transfer portal makes it easier to turn things around in 1 year when you aren't coming off, I'm sorry, Buffs fans, one of the worst Power 5 football teams we've ever seen. At least that I've ever seen. It's like them.
Mark Johnson was on the show yesterday, and he's the voice of the Buffs, and he said it was a bad 1-11. Not that there's a lot of good 1-11s, but it was a bad one.
Right, and I've compared them to Arizona before, because Arizona went 1-11, right, under Jed Fish in his first year. That was not the worst 1-11 you've ever seen. They had some bad games, but they had some legitimately competitive ones. Colorado, aside from that Cal game and the ASU game, they were uncompetitive in a big way week in and week out. I've never seen a team who was at least a 17-point underdog in the first 5 weeks of the season or at least a 14-point underdog in the first 5 weeks of the season go 0-5 against the spread. I've never seen it before. I don't know that we'll ever see it again. So the challenge in that element is there, but the early returns are so strong when you look at both the portal players he can attract, whether it's ones he knew or ones that he was able to just kind of bring in because he's Coach Prime, but then also the high school recruiting. You have to do both in a big way in today's world of college football. And so far, I think that's a big takeaway from Coach Prime's tenure. Before we've even seen a snap of football, the talent acquisition is what we thought it would be. Not going to be an issue.
Yeah, it's not going to be an issue. And I think the coolest part when covering him is we talked to Kylan Fox, who's a highly touted 4-star tight end / defense end type of guy. He has over 60 offers right now. He said Coach Prime is the coolest coach in college football. And while that doesn't mean like a lot, because cool doesn't always get you everybody, like Colin Simmons.
It doesn't mean nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't mean nothing. Colin Simmons, the number 3 recruit. He was supposed to go to the spring game, isn't going to the spring game anymore because he wants to play in the SEC. And so there's going to be guys like that Coach Prime just probably can't get because their mind is like, I'm going to play in the SEC. But there's going to be guys that he flipped Dylan Edwards from Notre Dame. He flipped Adam Hopkins from Auburn. There's going to be guys that he attracts. Cormani McLean from Miami and Florida and that whole ordeal.
Yeah, Cormani was the big one.
Yeah, and so like the whole aspect of him just having Colorado in the mix for players is a different scenario than they were under Carl Durrell and people of the past. Mel Tucker could have had them recruiting at a higher level, but I don't think we ever got to see him peak because he obviously was he moonlighted as a Colorado coach, I guess you could say. He was there and gone.
Not long for the road.
Yeah, my headline is, and this is, I think the first headline he actually made outside of taking the Colorado job was when he spoke to the team from last year and said, I'm bringing my own bags and it's Louis. And he was, which we talked about this yesterday on yesterday's episode. I took it as he was basically telling them to hit the portal. He's bringing his own guys. Mark Johnson, who is around the program very frequently, he took it as he was challenging them, the last year's roster, to kind of stay and compete because they had a standard that they wanted to meet. And if you wanted to be a part of that standard, stay. And if you didn't think you could be part of that standard, get out. And so either way, he was challenging the team. He was telling them to hit the portal. That was, I think, the first time we've ever seen the transfer portal used as like a business transaction in college football publicly. I think we all knew that it's a business transaction. There's no shock that Jordan Addison was going to USC and all of a sudden he had deals with Delta or whatever airplane NIL stuff that was. Like there's obviously business all over. We've seen Oregon be rumored to try to poach. I think it was Jahdae Barron from Texas for NIL money. Xavier Worthy has been attempted to be poached. These are just guys off the top of my head. NIL is circling around. Drake May from North Carolina. And so to finally see someone just be like straight up like, I want to bring in better people from the portal and you guys are currently taking up roster spots, that was absurd. But it was also like, wow, this is where college football was at. And so I think that was one of the bigger headlines of the offseason as well.
Yeah, I think the way that evolves and and continues to develop for Colorado. It is an interesting one to watch because the athletic director for Colorado, when they announced the hiring of Coach Prime, said very openly, like, yeah, we don't actually have the money right now, but I'm gonna go find it because we're gonna just make this work. But the amount, yeah, the amount of interest and buzz that Coach Prime generates. I mean, the press conference was just swarmed with media, and that's what it always is. And I can't imagine that does anything to a donor base, but fires them up, right? And so nowadays, when you talk about firing up a donor base, you're talking about getting the NIL collectives well funded so that players can have access to that stuff. Because if you don't have that in the modern recruiting era, you are behind. And that's not a place where Colorado wants to be, because it's a place where they've been for a very long time. And I think you're seeing this with Kenny Dillingham down at Arizona State as well, right? His the phrasing of his message down there is activate the valley, right? Because he feels like there's a bit of a sleeping giant element at Arizona State, which is very true, by the way. Very, very, very true. And he's making an emphasis of like, look, we want to do X and we want to do Y. And in order to do that, here's what we need from you. And yeah, a lot of times comes down to the old Johnny Manziel hand gesture, right? It comes down to the dollars, but that's the world that you're in. If you can't get there, then you can't compete at the level that Colorado would like to compete, right? But the good news is they don't have to, get everybody all at once right away, but they've already got, they're going to have two of the most athletic, dynamic corners in the country in 2023, which is good because there are a lot of elite quarterbacks in the Pac-12, a lot of them. It's the best quarterback league.
That'll probably be a topic we get to in our biggest challenges discussion, because that is the biggest challenge is the strength of the Pac-12. Sorry to cut you off.
You're good.
Final pick of the draft before we move on. Final pick, and this isn't
for what the biggest challenge is.
No, biggest headline. We need
biggest headline, right? So, I'll probably take some heat for this one, but I already have before. I'm okay with it. I think the biggest headline is Shedeur Sanders, because that's a guy who was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, if I remember correctly, goes to Jackson State, has a lot of success as the quarterback. Now he's coming to Colorado, and Coach Prime, hinted at the press conference. He said, "There's your quarterback," and then he quickly realized, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that." But he's gonna have to earn it, and we were like, "All right, Prime, yeah, gotcha." Quarterback competition, right?
Yeah.
But again, a guy who shows good arm talent, who's played a decent amount of college football, but Power 5 is different. And the great, I think, comparison for him is Cameron Ward from last year, who tore it up at the FCS level, went to Washington State, and he was pretty good, but he was not the best version of himself. I think in 2023, if he blends with their new offensive coordinator who comes over from Western Kentucky, Cam Ward has more untapped potential. And one of the reasons, if you watched him last year, that he had some mistakes or turnovers was, that there were a couple inconsistent things throwing the football that, just require some touch up in the offseason. But one of the things was he would make throws that might have worked at the FCS level. But when you make that jump to the Power 5 ranks, there are plays you have to realize you can't make. And he and Washington State, by the way, got better as the season went on, which is why the Cougars are a really fascinating team in 2023. What are they going to get there? So I think that's one of the other storylines is Coach Prime opted not to go for a Power 5 portal transfer, which he absolutely could have done given the caliber of players that he's been able to attract so far. He wanted to stick with his son, who does have talent, and we would have given credence to as in terms of being capable of being a starting quarterback if he'd come out of high school, gone right to Colorado. But how's he going to make that leap? Because that's, I think, a very legitimate question when you watch what other FCS quarterbacks have done. For some guys, it's seamless. But for Cam Ward, he was good, he was productive, but he was not the best version of himself early on. And so I think what happens to the quarterback position, which just was a revolving door of, we'll call it mediocrity at best in 2022, that needs to be better for the Buffs.
I think I was an injury away from taking some snaps at Colorado's quarterback, and I don't know if we want to see that. But yeah, before we move on from to our next topic, Shedeur and Cam Ward, it's a good comparison in terms of situations. Stylistically, Cam Ward is he reminds me of Johnny Manziel in terms of the way he sometimes just makes magic happen. And at the FCS level, he was able to make magic happen a lot. And at Washington State, there was times where he would scramble around for 15 yards in the pocket, and all of a sudden he just got sacked for a loss of 30. Whereas Shedeur is more kind of your straight up, like, he can run quarterback and looks to throw. And I think working with Tom Brady this offseason will really help. Working with Tom Brady again will really help develop his skills even more. I think it's just a matter of how quick he can adjust. He has the weapons. The only thing that worries me is the offensive line, and there's another portal window coming up. And so I think if Shedeur can kind of just be good and then improve throughout the season, like if he starts off really bad, it's going to be tough to overcome because their schedule only gets harder. But if he starts off decent and then continually improves, that's a good position to be in. They have room to play there. Guys, the tournament is heating up, and there's no better place to get into the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet didn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you could go wager on everything from money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the net, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. I had Texas winning it all, but now I don't know. I probably have to go San Diego State. FAU would be cool. I don't know.
You mean future Pac-12 member San Diego State?
Future Pac-12. I mean, if they aren't now, I don't know what's happening.
I'm right there. I'm right there with you, buddy.
They should be. Okay. This isn't the biggest challenges for the Pac-12 podcast because that would be a 3-hour segment. This is the biggest challenges for Colorado discussion. So this could be currently, future, just anything that you think will hinder Colorado and Coach Prime moving forward.
How about the fact that Washington State's probably the preseason power ranking 7th best team in the league? Like, this is not a cakewalk of a conference the way it had been for several years, or at least how it had been perceived, which was always worse than reality. But still, the strength of the league going into 2023, this is going to be one heck of a swan song for the conference because you've got USC and Caleb Williams, you've got Washington and Michael Penix back, you've got Oregon and Bo Nix back. Those are probably your top 3. Oh, by the way, there's the 2-time defending champ Utah Utes who are back with Cam Rising, assuming he's able to get healthy. You've got Oregon State who added DJU, and then UCLA. You know, I think they're pretty poised to be a pullback team a little bit, but I don't think they pull back to disaster. I don't think they pull back to being bad.
They're gonna be a good 8-win team or 9-win team.
Yeah, I think 7 or 8 is probably their range because I don't really know what I'm getting from them with the quarterback situation. Whether it's Dante Moore, whether it's Colin Schlee, the Kent State transfer, don't know at this point in time. But whoever it is, he can't be as good as DTR, who was really good. Like, he was incredibly raw when he first got to UCLA, but by the time he left, it was his 5th year, and he was, a high 60s to 70% completion guy. He's a ridiculously dynamic athlete. Not having him at quarterback, you can't possibly have that same level of production. So I think that, Chip Kelly's got a history in college. I would know as an Oregon guy of developing more than one quarterback. He coached 3 different ones, and they all played very well when he was in college at coaching with the Ducks. But there's still going to be, I think, a little bit of a drop-off there. How much can you rely on a true freshman versus a transfer who comes in with some hype and expectation, but nothing otherworldly? I think that's a fair question there. But then now you've gone through half of the conference, and you haven't even mentioned Arizona, who, if their defense takes a step forward, could definitely be a 6 to 7 win team. They were a 5-win team last year. I think it's easy to forget that. They were a 5-win team, upset UCLA on the road, played very well in some other games too. They played UCLA pretty well, or USC pretty well. That was, of course, UCLA. Well, they beat them, but like they had a lot. Their offense was not the problem. Their defense was the problem. So you just look at the depth of the league and the depth of the quarterback play you're going to have, and it's absurd. It is deeper at the quarterback position than any other league in the country. I will argue that from now until the end of the season.
I agree with you. They got 3 Heisman contenders at the top.
Exactly. You have legitimately 3 guys who, if you told if you were told today this guy wins the Heisman Trophy in 2023, you can foresee a realistic path to that happening. If Penix leads the country or is close to it in passing again, and Washington is, an 11-win team and a CFP contender, they could do it. Bo Nix doesn't have to lead the country in passing, but if he puts up touchdowns at the rate he did last year with a 71% completion percentage, he was in the Heisman race until Oregon fell out of it. You could see that in Caleb Williams. We already know what it looks like. He's the best player in college football. So that's the challenge for the Buffs is they've got a long way to go on the rebuild. They've added a lot of talent to account for that, but still their roster is behind where other Pac-12 teams are, and though Shedeur Sanders has a good amount of upside, you can't at this point in time expect him to even be a top 5 quarterback in the Pac-12 because there's just so much depth and talent right now in the league. So I think that's one of the biggest hurdles for the Buffs is that there just are not that many breaks in your schedule.
The timing of the emergence is tough.
But it could be worse because after USC and UCLA leave, it'll get easier for Colorado, and there will be a void of top teams to emerge, and Colorado could 100% be a candidate there.
That's when Colorado should be peaking. If Shedeur Sanders is a top 5 quarterback this year, that means something is going very right for the Buffs, and that their season is probably on a high trajectory that we didn't expect. My biggest challenge, and I'm going to go more so in the future and off the field, how people react when Coach Prime and the Buffs, assuming they struggle, because the schedule is hard, toughest schedule in the Pac-12. They have their easiest games, Colorado State, and other than that, they play all Power 5 teams. I think they play the top 5 Pac-12 teams. I'm not even joking. I think they play Utah. They have USC. I think they have Oregon and Washington. The only one they might not have is Oregon State, and even then they might have them. I don't have the schedule in front of me. So they play at least 4 of the top 5, and I think there's going to be some bumps in the road, and I think it'll be interesting to see how well Coach Prime is able to maintain his cool factor on the recruiting trail and the transfer portal when the Buffs aren't as, I guess, successful as people would hope in year one. I still think there's room for success. I just think there's going to be some times where people like social media is going to want to tear the Buffs down. They're going to want to tear Deion or Coach Prime down, and they're going to want to tear Shedeur Sanders down. And as soon as they struggle, when you get a new Colorado's getting the attention of a blue blood program, and they're poised to go peak season like 7 wins. Like that is like 7 wins is like a amazing season for them. And yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, I just pulled up the schedule for the Buffs this year. They miss Washington. They do have Oregon State at home, but they have to play Washington State. And you don't hit Cal on here. You do hit Stanford, but that's just kind of a fortune in the scheduling realm. But I mean, you look at game 1 at TCU. That's going to be tough. Like that's going to be a very difficult game in Fort Worth. And Nebraska, Colorado State at home. You'd like to think they could get at least one of those against Colorado State. But then you go through conference play and, Oregon and USC, those rosters are in a different category at this point in time. Doesn't mean they will be in a year or two, but right now, Oregon and USC far more developed. But then you go Arizona State, Stanford. I think they could win one of those. UCLA, Oregon State, maybe win one of those. Close Arizona, Washington State, Utah. There are just so many good teams in there. It's like who's the easiest? Like if you're just talking about winnable games, Colorado State, Arizona, maybe Washington State. Yeah, and I could see Nebraska as well. Like I only see 5 games where you look on the surface and say, yeah, they have a great chance to win there. So unless they pull an upset, I can't see them going over 5 wins. But if they just pick up 3 or 4, that's a successful season, because when you go from 1, the goal is to get more, and that's definitely a schedule dependent thing.
Yeah, it's tough schedule, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But the Built March Madness bracket is here, and we know you guys all have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. So go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'll be voting for the coconut bar or puff. I don't care. It's either one. And if you want your favorite team to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On listener will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. Built is the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're so amazing. You won't even think they're good for you. What makes Built bars and puffs so good? Well, for starters, they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. So run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Lastly, before we go, we kind of previewed it a little bit already. We're going to talk ceiling. So obviously, we know they have a tough schedule. I think just historically, there's going to be room for one upset. So I don't know who it's going to be. It could be a Utah team desperate week 12 that maybe is pushing a little too hard for a Pac-12 championship appearance. It could be a USC team that's kind of sleepwalking because they have their first 4 games they may as well be playing a JV high school team. I don't know. Their first 4 games are not that much impressive. It may be a UCLA who's kind of trying to figure things out with their quarterback situation. Is Dante Moore pushing for the starting role? Is Colin Schlee better than Dante Moore? Who knows? So there's maybe an upset in there. I think we talked about there's 5 winnable games is what we said. I think they're ceiling realistically, assuming like it goes perfect. They win the games that they should win, and there's an upset or 2 in there. Ceiling 6 or 7 wins. I think that is.
I think 6 is the ceiling because I look at it and say, okay, there's 5 games on there where I could definitely see them winning in a realistic fashion. Let's say they pull one more upset, and I think the 2 upsets that would be the most likely. I think you'd go UCLA, Oregon State. Oregon State, you've got at home. Great crowd there in Boulder, and Oregon State was a really good team last year, but they've got some question marks coming into the season, though they still should be a good team. And Jonathan Smith and his defensive coordinator, Trent Bray, are both really, really high-level coaches in this league. But UCLA, you've got the quarterback question. Number 1, don't know what's going to be happening there. Number 2, it's not a hard road environment to play in. You know, I look at the other games where you could potentially pull an upset. I don't think they've got the firepower right now in year 1 to go up against USC. I don't think they can go into Autzen Stadium and beat Oregon. I don't think winning at Arizona State would necessarily be that much of an upset, considering ASU was a 3-win team last year. Same thing with Stanford. I'm talking games where they will be a heavy underdog, and UCLA and Oregon State could both be options there. And I look at the last 2 games of the year, both of them on the road, Washington State and Utah.
Tough environments.
Those are tough places to play, man. Tough places to play, and they're really good teams. Utah is always playing its best football at the end of the year. We've seen that each of the last 2 years with Kyle Whittingham there, and Pullman is just a tough place to go. So I'd say your biggest upset chances, UCLA or Oregon State back-to-back weeks. Would not be shocked if Colorado won both of those games. But, you know, there's also a lot of information to take in until then, right? Yeah. It's how do they play against TCU? How do they play against Nebraska at home? Is there a big road-home split here with what'll be a fairly young team? I think you could see that, but I'm so fascinated. I'm so ready for football, man. I'm so right. Don't get me wrong. I'm a college basketball diehard, but the Pac-12 stinks at college basketball, unfortunately.
Shout out San Diego State.
Shout out San Diego State big time. But yeah, it's going to be such an awesome final season of the Pac-12 as we know it.
Yeah, and I think Colorado basketball trending up as well. There was a little Bronny James in Colorado trend the other night. Don't think it'll happen, but it was exciting. You're
getting Jalen Williams' younger brother.
Yeah, it was an exciting 30 minutes of my life. I was like, oh, Bronny James, Colorado, okay. No, I think their ceiling is, one, we don't know their whole roster yet. They don't know their whole roster. Not everybody's there, and I think that's the craziest part about. I mean, nobody's whole roster is there right now, but Colorado, I think just the sheer. They're bringing in like nearly 60 new players, and that number could jump to 70 something after this next transfer portal window. And so we really don't know what to make of them. And even then, I think early in the season, we still won't know what to make of them because I feel like there's going to be a period of like, okay, and I don't want to name names. So I'll say Kevin Borba starting 1 week. Okay, Kevin Borba didn't perform this week, so someone else is starting the next week.
Yeah, he could have short leashes, and I think that would be very on brand with Coach Prime, and I think that would also make a lot of sense because coming off of last year, there are no positions that are set in stone except for maybe Cormani and Travis Hunter. Like, other than those 2 guys and Shador at quarterback, like, what are you bringing back? Like, everything should be. Honestly, if I were Coach Prime, I'd almost treat the whole season as an open competition to try to get ready to be above 500 next year. Like, if you're 3-9, 4-8 this year, you're totally fine. Revamp the roster more. Figure out which guys you definitely want to bring back. Put together NIL money for those who you need to, and then go out in 2024 and be like, okay, we need to make a bowl game this year.
Yeah, and a lot of people to kind of decide who's going to be doing what. So, Spencer, I appreciate you for joining us. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Buffs your first listen today. For your second listen, check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Experts Isaac Shaw and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know on and off the court, plus hear from big name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Spencer, before you go, I need a prediction.
Yeah.
I just need a year, and we're just going to let it simmer. When will Colorado be contending for a Pac-12 championship?
Ooh.
Or if everything goes wrong, the Pac-12 championship.
Let's certainly hope not. I don't think that's particularly likely. I know the athletic director said he didn't want to go back to the Big 12 and they weren't going to do that, but we're going to continue to speculate about it anyway, because that's just kind of the way that this works and such. But I'll say 20. So many things can change between now and then. I do not think 2024. I'll say 2025 earliest, probably 2026 if they're able to keep Coach Prime around. If you can't keep him around by 2026, that means you probably made an appearance in the title game in 24 or 25. So I think 25, once USC and UCLA are gone, you've had a couple of years to get recruits in and develop your system, make coaching tweaks and hires and all that sort of stuff. I think that's a reasonable goal for Colorado. So I'll say 2025 or 20 or 26 at the latest, when Colorado should expect, if things are going well, to compete for a Pac-12 championship.
Pac-12 championship incoming. You heard it here first. We appreciate you for joining the show. We will see you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend.
See ya.